Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother into the temple, coming to us from House Doc Productions, the madman behind Metahumans Rising, now coming in with with a full-on setting expansion known as House of Steel, currently kickstarting. The one and only T. Dave Silva. How you doing today, man?
Oh, I'm all right. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, and we are currently kickstarting our first major expansion for Metahumans Rising. You have to come up with some cool titles. We're calling it a world book.
Yeah, because from what I understand, in between the original core book and now, most of what's been done has been like modules or adventures and whatnot. Unless there's one that slipped by me.
So we've done a number of web enhancements.
Mm-hmm.
We did a series on martial arts where we explored recreating martial art, like real world martial arts in Metahumans Rising, and then how to make them super martial arts based on the mythology around the given style.
Mm-hmm.
We did a series on if you're a fan of City of Heroes, how do you get some of those iconic elements into the tabletop experience? We've done a number of enhancements like that, day jobs. These are some of the talents you might want. So there's more than just the adventures out there. We've really tried to support everything since 2019 when we first launched Metahumans Rising. But this House of Steel is taking everything that we've done to this point and saying, okay, this is the world. This is kind of the logic that's been operating on the back end for all of these things that we've been writing. And bringing this to the table now, right? How do we expand into a full comic books universe? And then there's also some we've been doing this for 5 years, so we've got new power ideas, new boons, different advancements for characters, things like that, to help make more and unique concepts.
Mm-hmm. And since we're dealing with a lot of setting, something that I think is important to note is the different ages when it comes to comic book history, and some games are closer fits to certain ages more than others. Some games will be better fit in the Bronze Age, some in the Silver Age, some in the Dark Age, as it's been called, and some maybe even far back as the Golden Age, though I haven't seen that many that try and go that far. But with that in mind, stylistically, what would you, if you had to say what House of Steel and subsequently Metahumans Rising fits into when it comes to those ages, where would you say it lands?
So, Metahumans Rising, the core book, includes a step 0 that's a collective character creation step, where everyone kind of lays down the tone and the feel, and specifically the age of your game. Okay? So there are tonal elements that you can all kind of agree on. Now, what we did for House of Steel, being a comic book nerd, is we start during World War One, in the timeline, right? Or I should say, the dawn of the modern metahuman begins during World War One, and we take it all the way into the 2000s. But as we do that, we kind of progress the age of the comic book age with the corresponding years in the real world, right? Or in the timeline setting, right? So your World War One, World War Two pre-code stuff, the characters feel very golden age, right? You didn't have the like Silver Age restrictions. Your heroes were very larger than life, but pretty much any topic was on the table. Because there wasn't any kind of regulation saying, oh, we can't talk about this yet. In the Silver Age, we're really laying the groundwork in high level concepts, because high level concepts can be very black and white. Um, of, these are organizations, these are structures of power. This is where the proliferation of superheroes kind of comes from, right? Establishing kind of like the context of spandex, if you will, right? It's okay to wear a cape. Um, and then as we get into the 70s and the 80s, we start to reevaluate those black and white ideals, um, and begin to take a more nuanced look as we move into the Bronze Age, and then into the late 80s and 90s. We move into the Iron Age, or the Dark Age, as it's referred to, where it becomes much more introspective, right? We get into um, what's happening behind the scenes and what is driving people to do certain things. Now, we skip over the Extreme Age of comics, um, which is kind of this period of um, lots of pockets, lots of action, and little on storyline.
The Rob Liefeld epidemic. um,
Well, okay, yes. Apologies to those fans of like the late '90s, early 2000s style of comics, but we mostly skip over that vibe, if you will, and move into what we call the cinematic age. Now, I've also seen people call it the Titanium Age, because we like to stick to our metals. But I like the cinematic age because in the 2000s, superheroes really evolved. Like you had your superhero cartoons dating back to like the 60s, right? But I think that we elevated the medium in the 2000s. That's no offense to the mid 90s X-Men, right? Uh, um, but you had the DCAU, which started in the late 90s, and ran through the 2000s. You had the X-Men movies that came out. Also, no offense to Blade fans. I fully recognize that that was the first comic book movie that people will accept because no one wants to talk about Howard the Duck.
I've been
Or
trying to memory hole Howard the Duck, and I've on more than one occasion threatened my table that if they keep acting up, we're going to do a watch party of Howard the Duck.
I'm gonna let you know I'd be there for that, right? Like, that's one of Tim Robbins' greatest roles.
Yeah. Adi,
Uh,
I took the idea because there's Schwarzenegger has said that back in the day, if his kids were acting up, he would say, if you don't straighten up, we're gonna sit in the theater room and watch Red Sonja.
liked Red Sonja.
Apparently, he really didn't. But no, if I really wanted to mess with somebody, I'd have them watch Inchon. The movie's so bad it never got a physical release.
Which movie?
Inchon.
I'm not familiar with this.
This was an attempt to do a naval epic by that was funded by the infamous Unification Church in Korea. And there is no DVD release of this. It is one of the most infamous Razzie winners of all time. The only way to see it is on the copies that are available on YouTube. And a lot of people say Heaven's Gate is the theatrical version of Heaven's Gate is one of the worst movies of all time. Inchon was worse. It doesn't help the fact that because of the color setup, everybody looks orange. Not like with a slight tan or something. No, I mean orange peel, kind of orange.
Okay, like Oompa Loompa orange.
Yes. As screwed
All
up as the
right.
whole Oompa Loompa thing, at least that was intentionally weird.
Let me say this: like, if I was Arnold Schwarzenegger and I wanted to torture my kids, it wouldn't be Red Sonja; it would be Hercules in New York.
Although, can you really count that he was dubbed over?
I, I mean, that just speaks to the quality of that film.
Yeah, but man, I'm
But
pretty sure
yeah,
I'm pretty sure Travolta's kids were threatened with Battlefield Earth at one point.
I wanted to like that movie, and then I watched that movie.
Oh,
Like, I watched the trailer, I was like, oh, this should be good, and then I went to the theaters and watched it.
would it surprise you if I told you that there was fraud going on with that movie?
Um, I kind of assumed that for most films, uh, but I would suspect a higher degree of fraud. Um, it's common for like actors who get paid on points. Like the studio, like, oh well, we actually didn't make a profit. Like here's all the fat that like got sucked out. That's why you're only getting this amount. Um, but I would suspect you mean something more like money laundering or much more dubious.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, one of the
Uh,
production companies was cooking the books in a way that you're not supposed to. Uh, that's the short of it. But getting back to this, when it comes to House of Steel, do you consider this to be both a player facing expansion as well as a setting book?
yes. So the book is set up in different sections.
Hmm.
Like we have the core setting information up front, right? Where we're going to give you major organizations, the active key figures in the setting, some of the historical figures in the setting, and then the timeline. Then we get into new character creation options, right? And this is where we have new attribute and talent arrays, new boons, new powers and advancements, and the newest or one of the bigger things is like we have species now. Okay, these are setting specific, um, um, like different alien beings or even a few homegrown new species that exist on Earth.
Hmm.
Um, so because one of the things that happens in the timeline is there are multiple alien invasions, as one does in a comic book universe, right? It's just kind of things that happen.
Hmm.
And so we explore them as a concept. Um, we talk about their culture. We talk about, kind of their histories as well. Um, and then if you're going to play someone from one of these alien species, like this would be a power that reflects their natural bonuses. This would be like some of their drawbacks. Um, so, for example, one of the new races or one of the new species is the Redoom, which were a subterranean silicone-based life form that became a spacefaring race after another empire tried to colonize their planet, not realizing that the things moving under the ground were sentient life.
Hmm.
Um, but because they evolved completely underground, they have no like visual center, right? They have their version of echolocation, and then they use specially modified gloves to consume visual data and translate that into information that they can process. Something that they had to develop post the invasion that they experienced.
Yeah.
Um, I say this to emphasize that we tried to make our aliens rather alien.
Mm-hmm. When you mentioned having no sense of visual info in the traditional sense, the honestly the first thing that came to mind is things like the naked mole rat. Just as a kind of parallel, since I think it's even when it comes to making aliens feel. Oh, I just saw what you posted. Making aliens feel alien. It's still important to have some degree of an analog or some way that it makes sense in universe. Oh.
Yeah, making sense in the universe was important. Like, if you focus on like the galactic aspects of the setting, you should walk out with a pretty um, like space opera feel, like similar to like the Shi'ar Empire or the Kree Empire from Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Not so much the MCU, but like comic book wise,
Yeah.
the Kree Empire had a kind of a rocky life cycle in the films.
Or the whole thing with the Kree and the Skrull and their eternal pissing match.
Yes.
Um. Then again, DC's not much better with the whole Rand and Thanagar thing. Who've the only thing that they'll agree is that they will never agree on anything. Um. But
Well, that's common ground. We can work from that, right?
I don't know. I've being being a semi fan of professional football, it in the Midwest, the only thing that Minnesotans, Wisconsinites, and Illinoisans will agree on is that is that they all hate each other equally. Oh,
But you're equal. There's equity involved.
yeah, and I have stated on multiple occasions that the dice gods are the greatest model of equality you will find, because it does not matter your ethnicity, gender identity, occupation, social standing, whatever. They hate you.
Oh, okay, I can't argue with that.
I never wish for good luck for my dice. I just wish for less bad luck. But obviously, one of the bigger things within within what House of Steel is bringing in is going to be ships, especially starships. And
Yes.
is this a case where starship creation is somewhat downstream from character creation, or do you have a whole different setup for how it works?
So, um, yes and no. We're building on the tools from the Metahumans Rising core book. So, in the core book, we set up a concept for background characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is fast to create NPCs. We give you like some core important stats. It's enough for like, oh, I need a quick, I need 20 goons to come and like jump my heroes. I need exactly like 2 minutes and boop, boop, boop. There they are. Woof. Right? Uh, but in the core book, we also said you can use these to build vehicles. Okay. And there's a couple of different examples um, in the core book itself. Starships use those exact same rules. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't get into Metahumans Rising abstracts minor details, right? Like, if you want to have like that little earpiece that you never see, but you know that every hero can talk to everyone else on their team,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no point expenditure for something like that. That's just a thing that we've all kind of agreed as part of the narrative, right? So if I want to build a spaceship, there's no extra cost to say, well, it has to be vacuum sealed, right? Um, what House of Steel does, though, is it adds new templates that are better geared for larger ships. So let's say you wanted to make an aircraft character, aircraft carrier. Right? It's the same rules to making the Batmobile as it is to making the Nimitz, as it is to making the 1701D Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Um, you don't have to do anything like we're not going to get into the shearing force and torque of your engines. Um, and we won't mention any games that do, but we try and keep it very high level. And the other thing is we try to uh, keep the number of different locations to a minimum. So we introduce this concept of scale, right? We say that any given ship can have so many core locations, right? But if you want to get bigger, you can just keep those same locations and we're just going to increase your scale.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a strike fighter might have, one location or two locations. A battle cruiser might have four locations. The Enterprise might have four locations, but it's an order of magnitude larger than that battleship, right? Because specifically the Enterprise D or E because they're like flagships, right?
They're flagships,
Uh,
and they're essentially micro cities unto themselves in terms of
yes.
just having whole families aboard ships.
Yes, exactly. And then, uh, like a Highliner from Dune, which is 20 kilometers long, would still have those four locations, right? It's just the question of what is their scale.
Now, speaking of scale, um, this might seem like a really bad Rorschach test. Not like that's the first time I've made that joke, but I'd like you to go from lowest to highest scale and give a example of a ship or a vessel in either it can be either comic books and be in science fiction or anything in between of something that would be of equivalent ish size. Obviously not one to one because this is still significantly abstracted, but something in the same ballpark.
All right. So we have two things that are happening here. We have the scale and we have the number of locations.
Mm-hmm.
So a scale one single location vehicle could be anything from say a motorcycle to a monster truck, right? Um, a four location vehicle is probably going to be the size of it's a 60-meter yacht, right? Or like a major I think it's a destroyer at 60 meters,
Could
right?
could a
But
tank
that's
also fit?
to give you a tank is still in that like one location kind of scale, maybe two, if it's like a super tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like a school bus would be two locations,
Mm-hmm.
or well, not just a school bus, but a bus in general.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a tank is very compact; it's very small. Well, comparably. Let me qualify that,
Yeah,
right?
because
And you could roll a number of tanks onto a destroyer, although I don't think destroyers really carry vehicles like that. Um, but you get into scale two, right? And on the upper end of that, like so the upper end of like scale one is like a destroyer, upper end of scale two would be like an aircraft carrier, right?
would you say the helicarrier that has been used so often and crashed so often by Shield would count as scale two?
Yep, 100% because it's an aircraft carrier, right? It just
Mm-hmm.
has some means of flight.
Mm-hmm.
So if we went scale three, uh, you could either go with the NSEA Protector or the Nostromo as an example. Although those are not like maximum size, but just a scale 3 example.
Mm-hmm.
The Protector being from Galaxy Quest and Nostromo being from Alien.
Yeah.
Scale 4 would be the Enterprise E or the Galactica.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a good example for Scale 5. Scale 6 is a Highliner or the Red Dwarf, the original Red Dwarf specifically. Scale 9 would be like the Death Star. And then Scale 10 would be the command ship from Independence Day, where it's almost 600 meters by almost 500 meters by almost 400 meters.
Would you say the
Right.
world ship from Andromeda might be closer to scale 10?
I don't know how big it was. Like I didn't follow. Like I only watched a couple episodes of Andromeda, so
It
I don't have a
was
good.
it was big. It was big enough that it housed several planets.
Let's see here. So if I look it up, let's see if there's some dimensions for it. So if it houses planets, scale is an open concept,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can just go bigger, right? There's nothing wrong with going above scale 10. That's just kind of where I stopped because the command ship from Independence Day was again like almost 600 kilometers in size, right? Or like 500 square kilometers, cubed kilometers, which is huge.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not planet size. But as you scale up, like each scale is significantly larger than the last, and you can just keep going if you need to.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Uh, so given that, I'm gonna throw a few ships at you, and you can tell me which scale and how many points you'd say it would have. One of the big ones I want to throw at you is the Normandy from Mass Effect.
Uh, so I have to ask you the same question though. Like, do you know its dimensions, or can you give me like a rough estimate of like how big it is?
I believe I should be able to. Give me a second. So the
I hate to say this, but Mass Effect is actually like a gap in my gamer portfolio, and I slept on it, and then I felt bad going
yeah.
back to play it because I didn't really find out about it until Mass Effect 3.
Hmm. Um, it is it is described as a Deep Scout frigate. Um, and as far as its size, as far as dimensions, that's not given, but it is described as a smaller than a warship. It's essentially a large frigate that has scout tech.
All right, so would you say this is kind of like on par with maybe like the Millennium Falcon or the Serenity?
I would say it'd be bigger than that. I'm thinking probably the size of Voyager.
The size of Voyager. Okay, so yeah, so you're probably looking at something that's like scale 3 then,
Mhm.
right? Um, yeah, yeah, you're probably looking at something that's like scale 3.
Yeah, whereas
Because
this.
that would be about the Voyager side, which was it was a capital ship, right?
Mhm.
In Star Trek, but like different sci-fi universes have different scales, obviously.
Yeah, pretty much. And I suppose, since you brought up the Serenity, another one I'd want to bring up as a bit of an example of this would be the Bebop from, well, Cowboy Bebop, which,
So I think the Bebop would be like scale 2 or like the upper end of scale 1.
yeah,
Because
because
I think it was actually a pretty tight little ship.
it was
Um,
because it was it's a repurposed fishing ship in universe, and I'd say
Yeah,
it's comparable in size to the Serenity because the Serenity was never all that spacious. I'd probably say the
yeah.
Serenity is slightly larger because of the fact that they were more often than not hauling cargo.
Yeah, so then that would be scale one. Like I actually use the Serenity as like a good the Serenity and the Millennium Falcon as examples of a freighter and a blockade runner, respectively.
Hmm.
Um, the Millennium Falcon being slightly smaller than Serenity.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
I'd say
and
something else
I
that
will
might be
point
in the.
out that
Go ahead.
um, if I remember correctly, the Bebop had two ships, one of which was internal and one of which was kind of mounted to it.
It had three single crew ships.
Yeah.
You had Spike's ship, which was the Swordfish Mark II. You had um Jet's ship, which was I believe it was the Eagle Claw, and you had Faye's
Okay.
ship, which was the Red Tail. All three of them are
Yeah.
using the same kind of pod-like design, and I'd say are about the size of a fighter jet, give or take a few meters.
Yeah, so if they're like mounted to the exterior, yeah, like that doesn't change any of the math that we just talked about. Actually, so I'm running a beta test right now where the team has commandeered a pirate blockade runner,
Hmm.
and they've modified it because one of the characters is a former fighter jock, and so from his chair on the in the cockpit, he can dump himself into his mech that's kind of mounted underneath the ship, and with a airlock seal. So it's kind of the same concept with the Bebop.
Hmm.
Uh, well, like Bebop meets Voltron, where he's trying to drop into it.
Yeah. Um, I would say um the results. The other ship that was coming to mind was the Outlaw Star. Uh, I'd say I'd say that'd be significantly larger. Um,
Hmm.
but it does lead into another question, and that is, would there be any significant changes when it comes to handling like ship combat and how you integrate the whole party involved in ship combat?
So the fun part there is there's already like basic rules on how to handle like vehicles in combat in the core book. But what we do is we expand on that in House of Steel so that everyone can have an active role on the ship, even if you're not, shooting the guns, as it were, right?
Hmm.
Uh, there's a list of like 12 different talents that can all play vital roles from like area knowledge to survival, right? Perception, navigation, tactics. There's a engineering, repair. There's a bunch of different things that you can be doing on a ship during a engagement, and benefiting everybody else.
Hmm. And to that end, when we're dealing with full on interstellar ships within the setting, how do you see House of Steel handling um FTL travel? Is it a case where it's between points? Is it a case where it's um free form a la Star Trek? Is it a case where um there's specific gates that you've got to go through, a la Wing Commander? How would you foresee FTL travel working?
So this really comes down to the different FTL cultures in the setting,
Hmm.
right? So we have the Ardisis, which were uh, a former like scientifically minded race that after encountering a hostile alien species became effectively weapons dealers to the galaxy. They use a system of space folding that they have held to themselves. And they also understand how hyperspace works. Other cultures use different concepts, either hyperspace or like a warp bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And it was important for us to say, well, we're in a setting where everything from I was born with mutant powers to I've studied the mystic arts is acceptable. I don't want to have a single, like, this is the only way to move faster than light.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. So it's very much a mixed bag in terms of how FTL travel works between the different cultures.
Yes. One of the things that when we get into like the starship section of the book, we say, hey, this is kind of like we're covering our bases. If you want to run a space-focused campaign, and then here are the 3 major cultures, and if you are going to have a ship from culture X, add this template to the ship, right? Or add this other template to the ship to make them culturally distinct, right? So like the Ardices, because they are the most scientifically advanced, they add the advanced template, and they tend to add the sneak template because they focus on cloaking technology. They want to be able to observe before they do anything. This also means that they're really good at delivering a large number of ships before you realize something's about to happen.
Yeah.
Whereas the Lagoon are silicone-based rock eaters. One of their signature vehicles is a troop transport designed specifically to breach a hull and deploy troops into someone else's vessel.
Mm-hmm. Now,
so each culture has a very distinct feel when it comes to spaceships.
Mm-hmm.
Spaceship.
Yeah. Now, given the fact that spaceship creation is going to be a thing, do you plan on having a few templates that could be used if somebody needs to build a ship quickly?
There are. One second here, and I'll tell you. There's about a dozen different example spacecraft already there, right? And what we try to do is we try to handle commonly used broad categories, right? So like we have a battle cruiser, we have like a civilian corvette, a cruiser, a frigate, or a strike craft. These kind of or freighter or strike craft. These kind of like high concept. They will work in a lot of different scenarios. And then, hey, if you want to modify them, like, oh, I want a pirate ship. Here, this is the variant you're going to use for the pirate ship, right? You don't have to build that out for your specific campaign. You can, and we've given you the tools to do that. But if you just want it like, oh, I'm going to drop this, like, I just want a challenge right now. Boom, here it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, when it comes to the factions, do you have it set up where potentially the player characters could ally or become enemies with the factions that are going to be in the book?
So are you talking about like the because we have
things like the
domestic
Rippers
factions
and
and we
the
have like
Deadheads and the like.
Yeah. So like we don't dictate what the narrative for your game has to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you want to run a campaign where you get close to the Deadheads because the cult behind them has a common enemy or something like that, and you're like, oh, I want to do this thing and I need to align with him. Do that. Like I'm not here to tell you how to run your game. I want to provide tools um, to give you everything you need to create what you want for your universe, right? Now I say that having said like, hey, we have this expansive setting. Even in the setting, we say, hey, you can take this as is. Here are ways to take aspects of it. Here's ways to take just general concepts of it, right? Because we want everything to be customizable to your table.
Mm-hmm. Which, given that, and given that there's a handful of new options for the player-facing end of the equation, since you have a whole thing of setting up quick PCs or NPCs using the systems that are already in the core book, do you plan on having a few example pre-gens that are utilizing some of the new mechanics?
So every species um, and every faction that we discuss has sample background characters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we apply the templates as befitting the faction, right? Um, so one of our new factions is called the Rippers. This is a junkyard gang that specializes in repurposing advanced technology left over from the various alien encounters that have happened on Earth and just the detritus of high-tech heroes. Um, they kind of they get their starts like raiding junkyards, but as you progress in the game, you progress in the game by building your own exoskeleton that eventually becomes its own power armor. Um, and they're all about tweaking and modifying, repurposing tech, right? One of the new templates is called Shield, which is the ability to just generate a barrier like the barrier power in the core book, but now for background characters, right? And because they're all about repurposing tech, they've repurposed Zoe, which is another one of the alien species technology, to create force fields, right? So they get to apply that shield template, right? And you'll see the Zoe use that shield template also for their background characters as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, you've also talked about adding collaborative adventures that are repeatable. Uh,
Yeah.
Now, what part? How do you design an adventure that is built to strictly be repeatable?
So there's two adventures. The first one, Siege on Base Alpha, is designed to build a super base. Okay. It involves the heroes at the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the challenge, like the GM is effectively developing the second half of this adventure as we're building up the base, right? Like we're taking notes, we're we're putting in place the structures of the super base. But then the challenge that comes in is the siege part, based on everything that the players have just done collaboratively. That adventure, it is repeatable, and it makes sense to be played whenever you inherit a super base or you're setting up the super base for a team, right? Now, one of the things we talk about with this is like you could have established this in the background and it hasn't really been important. Now is the time. I'm going to take a session to flesh this out. I want to know what Xavier's School for Gifted Children looks like in greater detail, right? I want to know what Avengers Tower looks like in greater detail. It's not just, oh, we have now built a super base, let's put stats to it. You might not put numbers or values to any of these things for multiple sessions. And then it's like, oh, well, now I think I want to do this, right? And you could run that in any given campaign. You can run that multiple times in a campaign, just depending on the narrative involved. The second one is Neighborhood Watch. And Neighborhood Watch is all about exploring different parts of the campaign city or a location in general, right? So the same kind of concept applies. Everybody works together to add elements to a part of the world at large. Um, for example, like let's say you're running a Marvel campaign with the Defenders. One session, we're just going to build out Hell's Kitchen using Neighborhood Watch, and we're going to add these different elements from each of the different characters' perspectives. Like these are the things that are important to them that we will find in Hell's Kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, it's the same concept of we are going to build a threat based around the inputs that we're getting from our players. In Neighborhood Watch, because it's a broader concept, it includes like, oh, well, this is how I do like a bank heist. This is how I would do like a riot. Some of like your classic like short comic book adventures that might be like one issue or part of an issue, right? And Neighborhood Watch, you can run this anytime you want to explore a place in the campaign and add additional details to it, right? And you're not going to run it like every session, but this could easily be something that somewhere during a story, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to run this just to get more details, or in between stories, I want to go back and I want to revisit something that's already been established. Great place to run this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that does. Now, with that in mind, what would you be shooting for as far as the page count?
So this actually came up before. And let me say this. Unedited, we're at 239. Okay? That is a doc file. Depending on the support that we get, that number is going to change. Like it's not a formatted book yet. That's why we're running the Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like we have the beta file together. We're beta testing it, and if we successfully fund, we're going to share that with all of our backers. But for every 10 backers, we're adding a full character into the book. That's like an entire character sheet and write up. And then for every legendary hero, they can add their personal characters into the book as well, right? Also, for legendary heroes, you can actually insert your character into the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So the timeline will really be a collaborative effort from our historic heroes, our legendary heroes. We have additional writers from different parts of the world to make this a more global timeline. So it's not as centered on, like, I know what I know, but I'm going to acknowledge that there are detailed histories in other parts of the world that I've never even heard of. And that's why we've brought in additional writers to help expand that timeline and give you a global world of heroes.
Mm-hmm. And I'll certainly be looking forward to see how that develops. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple and enjoy the madness. And
Thank you.
anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty.